Thank you, Becky. That was one of the most dense readings we've had in a while. I probably should have had, anyway, thank you all. Welcome to First Zuumitarian and First Unitarian Church. So almost every night as we're getting ready to go to bed, I take our dog Phoebe out one last time, hoping to avoid doing it again at 3 a.m., right? And as I'm standing there in our backyard, I look up and there are usually a couple stars, maybe a dozen. If I'm in the right place in the yard, so I don't see our light or the neighbor's light or the street lamp, it's dark enough that I can see a constellation or two. And that's nice. It's twinkly, it's pretty. It gives me a little gladness on the way to bed. It reminds me of decades ago when I taught the astronomy merit badge at Boy Scout camp. I could find and name dozens of constellations in the clear night sky. I could watch the stars seem to turn through the night. It was just overwhelmingly beautiful. I was simultaneously humbled and awed to be a part of this universe, anything that big and gorgeous. A number of years ago, I was driving somewhere in the western United States. I think it may have been Utah or Colorado, sort of the mountains. Not a lot of towns, very few cars. It's after midnight at this point, so really I'm by myself on the road with the stars above. And it was just amazing. It was more stars than I've seen in my life. And I'm, driving along and kind of looking out the window this way and looking out the window that way, and I finally realized this is probably dangerous. And so I pull off the side of the road, stop the car, and get out and just revel in the Milky Way with more stars and more colors and just more awesome gorgeousness than I had ever seen in my life. It was really inspiring. Light can be inspiring, but we need sufficient darkness to appreciate the light. Our ancients had much less light pollution in their lives. As long as there weren't too many clouds, they could see the Milky Way and many constellations most nights. I think that gave them a sense of awe and wonder, as well as, of course, things growing around them. Once they became dependent upon that agricultural cycle, it was pretty important to know when they were in the seasons, how they would come and go, where the sun was rising and setting, the coming weather. That's where the word solstice comes from, Latin solstitium. It means the sun stands still. Those of us in the modern days that don't watch these things anymore may not know that the sun sets and rises at a different place each night. It goes up and down the horizon, and when it reaches the farthest arc on the solstice, it appears to rise and set in the same place a couple days in a row before cycling the other direction again. So the solstice is when the sun stands still for that moment. And so they're watching for that, making sure things are working as they're supposed to. And they made up rituals to honor and thank those forces that were outside of their control, to ask for favor or beg for mercy when things weren't going well. Whether it was the sun and the moon, whether it was goddesses and gods, power animals, the four elements of antiquity, our ancestors spent a lot of energy and resources to create places and artworks and devices to create and maintain good relationships with those forces of power. As we just heard Becky read, Dr. Gibbons said, modern-day pagans and those who celebrate earth-centered spirituality practice our religion exactly the way our ancestors did millennia ago. We make it up. There is no through line for paganism, no well-defined path that guarantees that this person learned from this person, all the way back thousands and thousands of years ago. This might be because the church and powerful men in many positions of authority tortured and killed the wise women in their communities for so many years. And yet the same ideas keep showing up. There is not a through line, but there are the same things popping up. This is kind of the same way for Unitarian Universalism, that comes no through line particularly, but the same ideas. A loving creator would not sentence his creatures to hell. There is one God that was human and divine, was divine the same way that you and I are. These things keep popping up through history, and so we take claim of them now. And we claim among those things the source of earth-centered traditions, the stars, the moons, the four directions. It seems natural that we Unitarian Universalists would include among our 6 sources of inspiration earth-centered religions. This is the 4th of 6 sermons about our Unitarian Universalist Association's sources. In the Article 2 of their bylaws, they have the 7 principles, which many of us have heard about a whole bunch, and the 6 sources. We've already covered the direct experience of awe and wonder, prophetic words and deeds of people, Jewish and Christian traditions, and we'll talk about humanism and world religions in future sermons. Today we're talking about earth-centered spirituality. Now, the Article 2 Commission is currently contemplating making changes in these things, right? So they've already made a change. I said the prophetic words and deeds of our human cousins. They don't use the word cousins, but up until a few years ago, that was the prophetic words and deeds of women and men. We recognize there are a lot more genders available than just women and men, and so now it's the prophetic words and deeds of people. In the same way, the Article 2 Commission is contemplating adding Islam to the explicit mention of the other 2 Abrahamic faiths, Christianity and Judaism. They may add Buddhism or Hinduism specifically. We may add Universalism and Unitarianism to our sources because those are different things than what we have now as Unitarian Universalism. They also might make some changes to the principles, so the 7 principles that we know and have on our walls at various places in this congregation. We've talked a few times about maybe adding an 8th principle, encouraging us to do the difficult work of unlearning racism in our lives and in our organizations and structures. All this is happening and will be voted on at previous General Assembly or at future General Assemblies. So there are 6 sources to ground and inspire us, and we learned from Kendall Gibbons' words that the humanists and the pagans and the theists have common cause with each other, and they have some bones to pick with the others. Humanists and pagans are against the cultural hegemony and the privilege of the theists. The pagans and theists object to some needed epistemological modesty among humanists because we don't have access to our own motivations. It's great to say, well, I'll just, by the force of my will, I will be a better person tomorrow and ignore the selfishness that rises up in me, and I won't eat that chocolate cake, and neither one of those work well in my life. We don't really know what drives us all the time. Before we can say we can and will do things by our will, we should probably do a little more work on ourselves there. And the humanists and the theists are right to sort of insist on some intellectual rigor, unsupported claims of an idealized past, and the simple goodness of nature. As far as I can tell, human beings have been human beings the whole time we've been on this planet, which means that we're really kind and gentle and helpful much of the time, and really awful sometimes. And the simple goodness of nature. The late Anne Rice talked about the savage garden. And you can see what animals do to each other, and some of the way insects lay their eggs and other insects. And it's not all goodness and light in nature. And being aware of that and using that in our rituals, I think, is important. One of the ways that pays off, I think, is more balance in a Yule celebration. We typically celebrate the return of the light at Yule, but we don't celebrate the return of the dark at Letha, at the summer solstice. Some certainly do, and I know that there are people who have a lot more nuance than this, but virtually all the rituals that I have led or been part of have been about the return of the light in December, and light in both winter and summer. Now, it's possible that the ancient folks really were desperate for the return of light and warmth as they're huddled there in their fields and are wanting the light to return. But, it wasn't surprising. It happened every year. At least after the first couple figured this out, they're tracking it from there on. They want to make sure it does happen, but they're expecting it. I think it's at least as likely that our more recent ancestors made this up and projected their own baggage and their own white supremacy into that myth and sort of gave it extra oomph that way. I can't suggest a causal relationship between favoring the light and white supremacy culture, and I couldn't say which direction it might have gone if there were. I am saying they are related. They're at least similar symptoms. The privileging of light also seems related to toxic positivity. Optimism is a worthy and helpful approach to life. Refusing to accept or talk about anything negative leads to pathology. Denying or minimizing our natural, normal human emotions, including the ones that are hard to have, anger and fear and sadness, just drives them deeper into our subconscious and leaves them to erupt in interesting ways later. So rather than privileging the light, even though the chalice lighting we used this morning talked only about the light and I had to add the darkness in there, today we are embracing the darkness. We are here to honor both aspects and focus more on darkness over light, on yin over yang, on flow over effort. Today we honor inaction and invitation and potential. Today's ritual will not include calling directions or casting a circle, as we have done sometimes. Instead, I will just remind us that there are things beyond our control. We want to be in right relationship with those forces, and we are co-creating a sacred space by bringing our best selves into this moment and bringing our best intentions so that we all benefit from this time together. One of the gifts of darkness is contemplation and inner growth. I had the privilege of listening to Parker Palmer talk at a Winter Institute once, and he talked about the life cycle not being the calendar year, but really more like the academic year. Seeds fall in autumn, they germinate underground in the winter and are slow to evolve and grow, and then they blossom in spring, and then they go on to fully fruit and bless the world in summer. And we're going to go on a bit of a journey, guided meditation this morning to see where evolution may be taking us. I've provided paper and pencil for those of you here in the sanctuary, and I meant to tell you that at home you might want to have paper and pencil handy. You'll have an opportunity to write down what comes up for you, and you can keep your notes if you want, or if you want to send them to me or hand them to me, I will mail them to you in the future. Now, a little more nuance on what we're doing here. This is not a New Year's resolution. We're not coming up with a task that can be scheduled and ticked off. We're opening to future growth and evolution. At this place in the calendar of maximum yin, maximum flow, we're creating for the conditions for that little seed to crack open, the potential energy to burst forth. We're making the gooeyest flow, so when the effort occurs, it makes the biggest change. Let us create a space or platform or toehold for the impulse of evolution to manifest through us. We are in darkness and contemplating. So, 13.7 billion years ago, there was a big bang, and there was energy throughout the universe. And then there was sort of a evolutionary potential, and that energy began to coalesce into matter. And at first, it was just really tiny little quantum fluctuations in the foam, but eventually we formed quarks. And that was good and fun and interesting for a while. And then the compelling evolutionary potential drove quarks into atoms. And that was even better. And there's all kinds of ways they could form together and make molecules, and then long chains of molecules. And they had all kinds of different long chains, and then compelling evolutionary potential tipped into life, single-celled life. And that branches out in all sorts of different directions through thousands and thousands and millions of years. And we get to this evolutionary potential to create self-aware life, intelligent life. And now we're getting close to us, right? We're in the last few tens of thousands of years anyway, maybe 100,000. Evolution continues to happen, continues to drive. And at some point in that evolution, we get to this point in our life. What's the most compelling evolutionary potential you see in your life? What will transcend and include the previous you? What is the path with the most heart going forward? And to belabor some of these growing metaphors, is there a seed that has been down inside of you germinating for a while, and now you're noticing and thinking that might be time this year? Is there a thing that wants to branch out in a different direction? Is a part of your life injured and healing and something new being formed and growing out of that place? Are you casting seeds to the wind, feeding critters and letting them carry your seeds? Maybe you're shedding your skin or your bark, letting your leaves fall, letting go of things which were once valuable but now no longer nourish or protect us. Maybe there's a really, really small, tight bud which is going to take the risk to blossom for the first time in a while this year. Where is there compelling evolutionary potential in your life? If something has come up in you, I invite you to write it down, not as a thing that you must accomplish in the month of January, but as a thing to contemplate giving life. If you want to put your name on it and hand it back, I will mail it to you in 6 weeks or so, shortly after Imbolc, and you can be reminded of that. And then at that point, maybe it's ready to take the next step of evolution. If you want to email me out in First Zuumitarian and put Yule seed in the subject line, I will not look at these things. I will just forward them. We can talk about them if you want. I'm certainly glad to help, but it is not my intent to read them, just forward them to you. We would ordinarily close or rather open the circle again and release the directions if this were a more neo-pagan ritual. We will say again that we're grateful for those powers that are in our lives. Go if you must, stay if you will. We are grateful to be in relationship with each other and these powers. If you didn't pay any attention to the last 10 minutes or whatever that meditation was, I hope that you have still learned that there are 6 sources that most of our congregations, and it's important to have a diversity of them so that they really truly do strengthen us by having that diversity. And if you did, I hope that the ritual has been useful and does lead us to interesting evolutionary path, down a path with heart into our future. So may we be. As always, the congregation